Welcome to Government Contracting Weekly, sponsored by AOC Key Solutions Incorporated. Government Contracting Weekly is the only television program devoted exclusively to the competitive and dynamic world of government contracting. A world where coming in second place is not an option, but where principle-centered winning is the only approach.
Good morning, I'm Hilary Fordwich. Welcome to this week's edition of Government Contracting Weekly. I'm coming to you from Thomson Reuters Compliance Conference, where we will bring you two conversations with executives who have operated at the pinnacle of global power. My first guest this morning is Joe Kampf, the chairman and CEO of Covant. Covant is a company where I've asked Joe what were the key lessons he learned from working with the richest man in the world. I know you'll be interested in hearing and then applying his great lessons of success. My second conversation this morning was with Suzanne Folsom, EVP, General Counsel, and Chief Compliance Officer of Academi, and John Quinn, Chairman of Quinn & Gillespie and board member of Academi with board oversight in matters of compliance. Academi, as you'll see, has established the gold standard of corporate compliance, which they are using as a key differentiator in terms of winning contracts. All of their insights are so beneficial, so let's get right to it. Welcome to our show this morning, where we have with us Joe Kampf, the chairman and CEO of Covant. Joe, thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
Now, this morning we're going to ask Joe something a little different. I'm actually fascinated because Joe had the privilege when he was a young man to work for the wealthiest man in the world, and he's brought with him, thank goodness, some great tips for us. First of all, who did you work for? Give us a little bit of background, and our audience, I'm sure, would love a takeaway as to what you learned.
Super. I worked for a gentleman by the name of Daniel K. Ludwig. He owned a company called National Bulk Carriers, which turned out to be the largest charter company for oil tankers. Big oil tankers.
And this was back in the 50s,
This
60s?
is back in the 50s and 60s. I started in 1972. He owned 3.5 million acres of Amazonian jungle. And for 9 of those 10 years I was there, I worked for a gentleman by the name of Tom Willers, who was vice chairman of Occidental Petroleum. And Tom told me in confidence once that he learned how to be really good at running a business by developing metrics on the business. So he would go around to the oil refineries and the other Occidental plants, and he would take a little pad in his back pocket and a pencil, and he would interview the workers on the operating floor and get all the little tips about how they execute on their job and how they do it well, and what were the metrics associated with that. How much did I produce? What was it per unit? And he would accumulate all of this information and use it later to, when he got into the management ranks, to show
Measure.
how he could be more effective, more productive, create more value, create more profit. And this led him to better and better jobs within Occidental Petroleum until he became vice chairman of the board.
So make sure you have metrics to measure your success and to prove to others too.
Exactly.
So really, Joe was exposed to sort of a Six Sigma approach back then in the 50s and 60s, but you also have another tip you brought for our audience.
Yes, I think when you achieve a station of leadership, when you become a senior executive or a CEO, if that's your aspiration, then there's the question of, what is leadership? Is leadership all about you, or is leadership all about your organization? And I've always told people that leadership, to me, is like throwing a stone in the center of a pond, a very calm pond or lake, and when the stone hits, it makes one little blip. That's you. That's you.
As the leader.
As a leader, I make that impression on the organization. But if you wait a few seconds or a few minutes, you see a lot of concentric circles form around that little first blip.
The ripple effect.
The ripple effect, and the ripple effect is you teaching others how to be leaders.
So you want those ripples to be good and of a
want
certain
them to
character.
be consistent
Yes.
and follow my business model, but I want those people to be independent within the organization and spread leadership around the company, because the more leaders I have in my organization, the better the performance is
So
going to
you
be.
can't do it all, but you're grooming others and leading others to then carry the message.
Exactly.
Wonderful. Given budget cuts and given the ever-pressing pressure of efficiencies and effectiveness in terms of the financial performance of companies, there's great speculation that this year may be the year of intense M&A activity. So I wanted to ask you, Joe, with your role at Covant, one, what are you seeing in terms of your future this year, but also what do you think our audience should be looking for?
We're seeing some very interesting properties come up for sale. However, we're seeing them in very niched parts of the marketplace. So while everyone knows that healthcare is hot and cyber is hot,
Cybersecurity, yeah.
et cetera, you have to really know how to buy a company in that space. Those spaces have their own niches. So there are a lot of little niches within cybersecurity, and you have to know, do I buy a company in this niche or that niche?
Whichever's going to be the hottest and the most
Exactly.
required. Yeah.
However, right now, the M&A market is frozen solid. It's like a small pond in Canada in January.
Waiting.
You can ice
Yes.
skate on it, you know, there's nothing coming to the surface. Waiting for sequestration to be resolved. And probably the thing that bothers me the most is that when the fiscal cliff issues were addressed, they didn't address the issues of sequestration, budget cuts, more rational budget cuts, a budget. We haven't had a budget in 4 years. We need a budget. We need a balanced budget. And all of these political issues right now are holding back the M&A space. So
As they are for the entire market, they're just kicking the can down the road.
They're kicking the can
all
down the
time.
road,
Yeah.
and M&A will be kicked down the road until those issues are resolved.
So given the whole marketplace has been somewhat frozen and everybody's waiting for some finality and some major decisions, at some juncture there should be an avalanche of M&A activity. What should a company that you're maybe looking to acquire do to position itself within one of those niches you mentioned?
Hillary, I'm asked this question frequently.
Yeah, I bet.
And usually the first thing I tell a CEO is, if you haven't thought about it until now, you're in big trouble.
Trouble, yeah.
Right? This is something you do in your company as a regular part of your leadership
And
responsibility.
your ongoing strategy.
Exactly. You're always looking at, what is my strategy? I know where I am. Where do I want to go? How do I get there? And do I have the right people? Have I branded the business? Am I performing for my customers to their, maybe even above their expectations? And so to get from a small business to a mid-tier size business or larger, you have to do this planning well in advance of a trough. We're in a market trough now. Things aren't looking so hot for the first half of 2013. So all of this planning should have happened. But if you didn't, what can you do? You can, if you're a small business, you can get a reputation with the larger players. Be a subcontractor.
Primes, with the primes.
Be a subcontractor. Eat some crow. You don't have to be a prime and win everything yourself. Let somebody else spend the B&P money. Let somebody else win the award. You supply the capabilities that you have in your organization and help them be a successful prime. This will enhance your reputation, both with other companies and with customers.
And give you a track record that's
and
usable in the future.
give you a track record you could use to be a prime later.
Yeah.
Another thing you can do is to look at your internal business development people and processes. Most companies we look at for acquisition don't have a formal business development process. Well, how can you grow if you don't have a pipeline of opportunities? How can you win if you don't know what the next thing you're going to bid is? If you're sitting around waiting for the phone to ring for a customer to ask you, can you help me? You're in trouble.
So make sure you have the processes and the right people in your BD operation. Covant has extensive funding, and I'm sure members of our audience actually, Joe, are wondering, what is the source of all that funding? So do you mind sharing with us?
Oh, sure. Actually, my wife is very happy that it's not hers.
Okay. Or yours.
That she's not the source. But we do invest in the deals that we make, myself and my Covant partners, but we actually have an exclusive relationship with one of the country's largest private equity firms, Madison Dearborn Partners out of Chicago.
Okay.
This is a firm that's more than 20 years old. They do a lot of name brand deals around the world, and we have an exclusive relationship with them to fund the deals we do in the government technology systems, solutions, and services space.
Well, at least we know now. Thank you.
My pleasure.
There aren't many CEOs in this town who are willing to go on the record with their real opinions and speak their mind. I'm delighted that Joe is quite willing to speak his mind. We do have an end to this show at some point, because I know you have so much to say. I would love to carry this on until the end of the year. But Joe, succinctly, what would you say to any government officials that are watching today? What do you say in terms of what they should be doing and what we should be doing in our nation?
Well, I think the first thing that needs to be done, and the politicians have to do it to themselves. They have to fix the system. The system is broken. It doesn't work. The fact that we had a presidential election in 2012, which showed us clearly that the country is totally divided over how to solve the problems, means that the system is broken. There is a way to solve the problems. You have to get rid of the power base, you have to get rid of the fundraising, you have to get rid of the earmarks, you have to get rid of all of that. Maybe we need term limits. Maybe you come to Washington, you serve your 4 or 6 years or 8 years, and you go home and get a real job.
Like the Founding Fathers did.
Like the Founding Fathers did, and that's the way they set up this democracy. Democracy is not working for the people today. We don't have a budget. The country does not have a budget.
And we haven't for 4 years.
The country has a $1 trillion annual deficit. Who's paying for that? A few rich people?
And future generations.
It doesn't work. We have almost $16 trillion worth of national debt. That's the same size as our whole economy. It's not sustainable, and it can't be solved in 10 short years. It took 40 or 50 years to create these issues, and it will take more than 10 years to solve them. So from my perspective, I think everyone wants them solved. It doesn't matter whether you're blue or red or purple.
Or old or young.
Or old or young or black or white or anything in between. Everybody wants the issues resolved because it's good for the country, and what's good for the country is good for everyone.
We don't have consensus on how to solve it, though. And you've given us some good ideas today, though, Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
It's evident that Joe Kampf is the kind of self-assured, successful leader who has tremendous optimism about the future of his company. On a related note, Suzanne Folsom and Jack Quinn also have confidence that in going above and beyond in matters of compliance, the future of Academi is very bright. Let's meet Suzanne and Jack. I'm delighted to be joined this morning by both Jack Quinn, the chairman of Quinn Gillespie, the very well-known lobbying firm in DC. Good morning, Jack.
Good morning.
And also with Suzanne Folsom. Suzanne is the General Counsel and Compliance Officer of Academi.
Morning, Hillary.
Good morning. In terms of the role that you both are playing at Academi, I know that Jack, you've brought a lot to the table from your role. Jack was former General Counsel in the White House in the Clinton administration. There's a lot that you've brought to the table to help Suzanne, to help Academi. Could you share with our audience, what are some of those great attributes that you brought over?
Well, I think the principal lesson one learns being a White House counsel is attention to detail. We, as you can imagine, had an awful lot of things to juggle at one time, and it became critically important to be not only prepared to spend the hours necessary to juggle all of those things, but most importantly, to ensure that you were thorough about everything, whether it meant vetting a nominee for a cabinet position, or ensuring that the White House was operating in full compliance with all of the laws to which it was subject. There was probably no White House in the history of the country, including those that succeeded us, that was subject to more governmental inquiry and investigation, not only on Capitol Hill, but elsewhere.
Intense scrutiny.
Intense scrutiny. Yeah. And I'm pleased to say that throughout all of those investigations, not a single person was ever charged with any wrongdoing. I think that was the case, not only because we helped to ensure that people behaved appropriately and legally, but we're also incredibly thorough about our compliance with all of those investigations.
And the vetting process that you went through.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that you brought that over to Academi. And Suzanne, your background for our audience, Suzanne was an assistant to both Barbara Bush and then also to Queen Noor. What have you brought from those global experiences to the table for Academi's benefit?
I think what I learned from working for both of those very prominent women is that it's very important to nurture relationships, because those relationships that you forge in one particular job may become beneficial later on. And it's important, especially in the job that I'm at right now, the friendships and relationships from my time in the Middle East working with the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan have come back to benefit Academi today.
Academi today, wonderful. Yeah. So in other words, make sure you're nurturing everybody that you're working with now. You don't know where they could be beneficial at some point. At the recent Thomson Reuters conference, risk management was addressed, and particularly important to Academi is all the compliance aspects of what you're doing. I know that that's a big differentiator for you, and it's hence Jackie being involved with the firm. Could you address what you found important about that conference and what it is that the Academi team is really focusing on to differentiate the firm for wins? Jack, maybe?
Sure. Compliance is really the heart of this company's success. The company, as you may know, under its previous ownership, was itself challenged, investigated, and
quite extensively.
Extensively. We now have an entirely new set of owners, an entirely new set of managers, and an entirely new board of directors.
You cleaned house.
Yeah, and I'm very pleased to say that just recently the National Law Journal bestowed what I think is an extraordinary honor on this company, naming it as the Washington Law Department of the Year for its compliance operations. This is, the metaphor of making a 180-degree turn is entirely appropriate here. This is a complete vindication of the incredible efforts that Suzanne and her team of people have undertaken since the change in ownership to really put a fine focus on compliance operations, training of everybody involved in the company in compliance, and absolutely exquisite execution of the new code of conduct and all of the other associated changes in procedure that have ensured really gold standard type compliance.
And the victories that you've had and the contracts that you've won recently, that's so important to government.
Absolutely. I mean, it's been a discriminator for us, and I think one of the reasons that we did win some recent government contracts, I think what's important is that the company has made a decision to truly weave compliance into the very fabric of the company. This is not a paper exercise. We are really actually, walking the talk. We have 100% compliance with our code of conduct, and that's very difficult for government contractors, especially when the bulk of your people are downrange. And so we're really pleased that the people are living and breathing the commitment to governance.
And that is what the government wants.
Right. When we refer to downrange, we're talking about the thousands of people who are overseas in very dangerous places, having to deal day in, day out, not only with the danger that surrounds them, but with the need to comply with the very many rules and regulations that we've made clear are important. The other thing is that I've said in so many other contexts that every organization is a mirror reflection of the person or the people on top. And compliance can be talked about in a lot of institutions, but unless the people at the very top are absolutely and rock solidly committed to it, it won't happen. In this case, the people at the top are absolutely committed to it. We should mention too, former Attorney General John Ashcroft is another one of the independent members of the board and a co-chairman along with myself of the Compliance Committee, and he has provided, important, as all of us try to do, important reinforcement to Suzanne's leadership in bringing about this revolutionary change in the company.
So when people downrange such as the Middle East, when you have people that far flung really, you have to have that at the top so that it's pervasive.
Yeah.
If you weren't able to attend the Thomson Reuters conference, you wouldn't have seen all the discussions about regulatory regimes and what that means in terms of contractors. Of course, there are many contractors with current budget cuts. They're going to be cutting corners. They will be tempted to say, well, we don't need the same kind of compliance team. We don't need the same kind of compliance oversight. Maybe that's a way for us to save funds. Do you think that's going to happen? And what about at Academi?
Absolutely, Hillary, that will happen, but not at Academi.
Not under your watch. No, I didn't think so.
Well, and not under the watch of Jack and John.
And the board.
Yeah.
And the board. Yeah.
I mean, the new ownership of this company made a commitment when they acquired the company to governance, and that is going to be, is going to continue to be the discriminator with respect to both winning government contracts as well as commercial business. And we have put in place a leading practices gold standard compliance program, and we've brought in outside experts to assist us in doing that. PricewaterhouseCoopers is our major governance advisor, and with them and with the guidance of Jack and John, we believe that we are setting a new bar for this industry.
And I think, at the risk of oversimplifying it, the government is going to have perhaps fewer contractors. And one of the ways in which I think it will discriminate the good contractors in and the less good ones out is in terms of their compliance operations. I mean, just in recent years, we've had a 50% increase in suspensions and disbarments. You've had vigorous new enforcement of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. I looked at some of the cases over the last 3 or 4 years, and in the major cases, they've averaged fines of over $300 million. And as you well know, there's increased emphasis on this in the Department of Justice. The False Claims Act, you've had $5 billion in recovered money in the last fiscal year. You've seen a surge in key TAM suits. There's a lot of activity going on in terms of the government agencies and those who support the government agencies in terms of ensuring that the government's focus on compliance is at an all-time high.
So what Jack is saying is DOJ is not going away. Comply and make sure you have some chance of competing with Academi, maybe.
Right.
Academi has a reputation for going above and beyond just a regular compliance requirements. What I'd love you to do is just give us an example of how do you go above and beyond? What is your due diligence process like? Something that our audience can use as a takeaway to say we should be doing more of that.
Absolutely. I think the regulatory regime where we have made significant strides to be best in class is the FCPA area with respect to third-party due diligence. There are recommendations that you conduct that with respect to your partners, your vendors, but there's not a requirement that you do. And we've taken it and made it mandatory within our company, and we do third-party due diligence with respect to everybody that we're doing business with, because we want to make sure that we're not doing business with bad guys.
And you have to also be careful about that, because in different parts of the world where you don't have the same backgrounds as here and the same ethics, it's
You bet.
even more rigorous.
Yeah, and particularly when it comes to the FCPA. I mean, compliance in some of the places in which we do business is challenging. But look, we've made a determination that if this company is going to succeed, and it will, we need to do 2 things. And they're equally important. One is to continue to provide the gold standard in security training and protection. And we have. We've lost 43 people to, if you will, enemy fire. We've never lost a protectee or even had a serious injury.
We've lost 43 employees.
We're determined to make that record go on. But the other equally important thing is to be the gold standard in compliance, just as we're the gold standard in security.
And that's what helps you win, and that's why you're winning in your space.
That's right.
And that we're going to continue to win.
And that's a great example to everybody watching today to make sure you comply. And Suzanne, thank you for spending the time with us this morning. And Jack, thank you very much for coming this morning too.
Nice to be with you.
Really
appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
have with us Peter Eyre, a partner in the Government Contracts Group from Crowell & Mooring. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning, Hillary. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming out. And Peter, I'd love for you to address for our audience about conflicts of interest that occur within the entire capture process, because most of our government contractor clients are facing those.
That's exactly right. And organizational conflicts are really something that the most sophisticated contractors are always thinking about, whether it's M&A and activity or really the whole business capture process. And let me give you an example. So think about Company A that's thinking about bidding on a systems integration contract. They're really excited about it. It's a great opportunity. What Company A has to think about is that if they win that contract, they might be precluded from bidding on a later in time, more lucrative contract to supply the system or the components. So it's really something that you have to think about from early on to make sure it's consistent with where you want to end up with your long-term business strategy.
So you've got to think big term, long term. So what preventative steps can contractors take?
Well, it's a great question, and it really depends on how early you recognize the conflict and what type of conflict it is. So again, think about an example where a contractor is bidding on an aircraft maintenance contract, and because of other work or a recent hire, that company may have access to confidential information. If you don't wall off the people who have access to that information, you can infect the whole team, and then you're left with contracting officers that are thinking about whether you exclude the company from the competition to maintain a level playing field. So it can be a really, really big deal if you don't recognize it early and work collaboratively with the government to try to mitigate that conflict.
That's really great advice. What else would you do to make sure you prevent any conflicts of interest?
So a lot of things that we work on is sort of at the earliest possible stage when you're thinking about new hires, vetting them to make sure that they don't bring with them any non-public confidential information, whether it's from the government or from another company. So a lot of it has to do with at the earliest stages thinking about steps you can take to keep your proposal team clean. We also see a lot of companies running into trouble with red teams, or when they're at the last minute they're trying to get advice and not thinking about the people they put on those teams, because you can run into conflicts of interest with those teams as well.
That's excellent, Peter. Thank you. So plan, strategize, and know where you're going to avoid conflicts of interest. Thank you from Crowell & Mooring, Peter.
Sure.
During these exceptionally uncertain budgetary times, it's crystal clear there really is a direct relationship between risk management and compliance. Under extreme budgetary pressure, it's more important than ever to make sure that every penny you spend furthers your mission and ensures your future success. Thank you for joining us on location. We look forward to seeing you next week.
You've been watching Government Contracting Weekly, sponsored each week by AOC Key Solutions Incorporated. Government Contracting Weekly is the only television program devoted exclusively to the competitive and dynamic world of government contracting. For additional information, comments, questions, or suggestions, please write us at governmentcontractingweekly.com.